More than 1/10 of global trade passes through a strait that measures just 20 miles across. The Bab al-Mandab, at the southern entrance to the Red Sea, is a vital choke point on one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. But it passes through the heart of a dangerous region beset by civil wars and humanitarian crises. Great Decisions examines a region where the world's great powers can cooperate to create stability or allow deepening rifts to tear it apart. Red Sea Rivalries, a conflict of interests. Next on Great Decisions.
Great Decisions is produced by the Foreign Policy Association in association with Thomson Reuters. Funding for Great Decisions is provided by PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP and the Nelson B. Delavan Foundation.
The civil war in Yemen has become one of the defining conflicts of the early 21st century. 3 million people have been forced to flee their homes, and 15 million are on the brink of starvation. But peace proves elusive.
Yemen has gone through several versions of hell over the last several years. I mean, there's the major war that's taking place between the Houthi rebel movement and the internationally recognized government, which is backed by Saudi Arabia, by the United Arab Emirates, by others, by the US as part of the broader coalition, whereas the Houthis are backed by Iran and very few others.
Yemen is the world's largest humanitarian tragedy today. It's actually as much of a crime as a tragedy. 24 million or so of Yemen's 28 million citizens are dependent on international humanitarian aid to survive.
It may be Saudi planes that are dropping the bombs, but they are U.S. bombs. It is U.S. assistance that provides the targeting.
The Yemeni crisis has proven so intractable because foreign interventions have exacerbated the conflict.
The academic literature is quite clear. Most civil wars usually don't last longer than a year, partly because the parties run out of ammunition. But when outside forces step in and side with or support various sides in the conflict, that is one thing that causes these conflicts to keep on moving forward.
The United States has been selling weapons to the Gulf states for 70 years. They've never used them. Now, all of a sudden, they went and started using them without us being in the lead. And so now we, as Americans, are facing a series of dilemmas about what that means when they perhaps use the weapons in ways that we wouldn't.
It's gone on way too long without any party really being able to demonstrate that they could get a leg up. And it needs to be resolved, it really does. And we've been pressing everyone to sit down and get to the table and try to get a resolution that gets us to a substantially better place than where we are.
Yemen could be solved if the United States chose to solve it. The United States has essentially stood on the diplomatic sidelines.
Gradually, the war in Yemen has consumed the entire region around it. Somalia, Eritrea, and Djibouti have each offered their airspace to the Saudi-led coalition, and several African countries have sent troops to join the fighting.
The Saudis, obviously, they didn't want to send too many of their own soldiers to fight and die in Yemen, so they recruited others, and the Sudanese in particular have served as cannon fodder.
One of the major challenges for the Emiratis in Yemen is that they don't share a border with Yemen. So they had to develop facilities in the region that could serve as a sort of logistical hub. So enter Eritrea.
As the war continues, experts worry that a failed state in Yemen could destabilize the entire Red Sea region, with ramifications that would echo around the globe.
This is not a place where you want to see greater chaos than exists today.
The root of all of this is that the United States has not decided whether it wants to be the military hegemon of the region or not and set up an order, a geopolitical order. I personally don't think it has the capacity to do so. I also don't think that it actually lies in the U.S. interest to do so.
The world's maritime powers regarded the Red Sea as a relative backwater until 1869. That year, a team of French engineers and Egyptian laborers completed a decade-long project to dig a canal across the Isthmus of Suez. Suddenly, the Red Sea was part of the route connecting Europe and Asia.
An artificial waterway that was built for the trades and pleasures of peacetime has turned Port Said into one of the most important of the world's junctions.
The Red Sea was a dead end until the Suez Canal shortened the arrival and departure of goods to Europe and between Europe and Asia dramatically.
For the British, the Red Sea was the entry point to the Indian Ocean, and the Indian Ocean is sort of the great lake that ties together most of Eurasia. And so if you're looking to control or regulate the entry and access points of the Indian Ocean, which could be relevant in any future conflict scenario, the Red Sea simply matters.
This is the activity in Suez itself. How many million tons of war material are handled here, no one could ever guess. Food, munitions, the myriad needs of a great new nation from overseas, and everyone in uniform. Victory was possible because there was no blundering at the crossroads of the world.
Today, the shipping lanes through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea remain critical for global commerce.
It's a real crossroads. There's a tremendous amount of commerce that passes through there. There's a tremendous diversity of nations that use the area for a commercial passage.
This is one of the most vital trade routes globally, and about 2/3 of the trade between China and Europe passes through the Red Sea.
It's certainly very much a linchpin between emerging Asia, the resource-based economies of the Middle East and demographic potential of Africa with advanced economies in the European Union, Mediterranean.
The Red Sea corridor is as important in many ways than the Persian Gulf is in terms of the transport of oil. It goes through the Bab al-Mandab at the bottom of the Horn of Africa, up through the Suez Canal, and then into the Mediterranean.
The world's navies also rely on safe passage through the Red Sea to reach the warm waters of the Indian Ocean.
The concern for the security of the Indian Ocean is broadly shared. Many navies keep ships present. For what purpose? To help assure freedom of navigation.
But it also is an important control point when we think about where there might be conflict in a next great war, particularly a conflict with China. This would be a very, very strategic point and really important for the U.S. in particular to have some presence.
Some analysts predict that the countries along the Red Sea are poised for an economic boom. Foreign investment, especially in real estate, is on the rise.
The Horn of Africa is a rapidly economically growing area. It is, in many ways, it's complementary to the Gulf. It has manpower and land, both of which the Gulf countries lack. The Gulf countries have monetary, financial resources, so there is a complementarity. And in some ways, you could think of it as moving in unison in a good direction where all benefit.
So there's huge potential, economic potential, but this is a part of the continent that is going to have to achieve a certain level of political stability to actually realize those economic benefits.
Where I see some concern from some of the large institutional investors is with regard to land rights. And if investors aren't clear on land rights, this still remains a lingering concern and often will prohibit larger pools of capital from identifying East Africa or the Horn of Africa as a destination for investment.
The entire region is at the center of the key shipping lanes of the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, and the Straits of Hormuz. The potential of this region has never, ever been greater. 65% of its population is under the age of 30. Like all young men and women, they seek great futures to build, great national projects to join, and a place for their families to call home. But this untapped potential, this tremendous cause of optimism, is held at bay by bloodshed and terror.
The looming threat of terrorism, piracy, and war means that freedom of navigation in the region is never certain.
The piracy issues have abated quite a bit. There's occasional problems, but as a major international crisis like it was, a decade ago, No, it's not like that anymore. But the primary security concern now is the Houthi group in Yemen. If they're able to get a foothold again on the Red Sea coast, they're able to send missiles into the Red Sea, and that can affect shipping.
The narrowest choke point between Yemen and the Horn of Africa, its tip, is just 17 kilometers. So were you to sink a massive oil tanker in that choke point called the Bab al-Mandab, you could precipitate a fairly significant security and trade crisis.
The richest and most powerful country on the Red Sea is Saudi Arabia. The holy city of Mecca, just inland from the coast, has long been a center for pilgrimage and commerce. In recent years, Riyadh has pursued an aggressive foreign policy. With tacit support from the United States, the Saudis have led the foreign intervention in Yemen.
Yemen is critical to Saudi Arabia because it is on its border. It's like Mexico to the United States. It's one of those countries that's always been a bit unstable, and that's always made the Saudis a bit uncomfortable.
The Saudis, with a broader coalition and with U.S. logistical and military support under the Obama administration, intervened. And that intervention has now gone on for several years, and the goal has been to dislodge the Houthis, weaken them, defeat them in some sense, and that has proven to be an unattainable goal.
I was skeptical about it at the time because I was no fan of the Saudis and their new leadership. I understood why there's a theory that, okay, by being a part of this, we could help restrain it, help try to direct it towards diplomacy, but clearly that didn't work.
Some observers charge that the Saudis have taken necessary steps to combat Iran. Others contend that it is the Saudis who are the aggressors.
Let me make it clear, the Houthis have been the principal entity that has caused the misery in Yemen. They attacked Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia needed to defend themselves. I accept that. But the way that the Saudis responded to the threat made the circumstances worse, and a lot of innocent people have been hurt and killed as a result of those activities. So the Saudis are accountable for the failure to conduct the campaign the way it should have been.
It's quite clear that the Iranians have played some role. It's disputed the degree of control that they exercise over the Houthis, but certainly they're providing armaments.
Yemen is not the only country where regional rivalries are being played out. In Somalia, too, competing Middle Eastern governments have taken opposing sides in a domestic conflict.
Given that the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Qataris have an interest in East Africa, that rivalry is playing out in East African states, particularly in Somalia.
You've seen the Qataris and the Turks grow ever closer to the federal government in Mogadishu, while at the same time the Emiratis and the Saudis are working with some of the federal member state governments within Somalia. And that has undermined to some extent the state cohesion of Somalia.
Many of the countries in the Horn of Africa have been drawn into not just the Iran-Saudi, but also the Saudi-Qatari and UAE struggles.
Determined to secure their western shore, the Saudis have pieced together a coalition of like-minded neighbors to take part in joint naval exercises called the Red Wave.
It was the start of a plan to try to get all of the countries of the Red Sea to work together. There's a perception in the Gulf that the United States is withdrawing from the Middle East, and not just under the Trump administration, but the Obama administration. And so countries like the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia have started to focus on protecting their own western flank.
The Red Wave, I think, is totally consistent with the Saudi Emirati strategy in the Horn of Africa region, and that is to politically, diplomatically, militarily, and perhaps even economically bind countries of the Horn to the Saudi and Emirati political project, and particularly their political project being limiting the influence of Turkey, Qatar, and Iran.
In an attempt to secure the Red Sea, richer Arab countries have also sought military bases on the African side, a trend that has the potential to upend the balance of power in the region.
That whole coast has been a scramble for military bases, for political influence, for economic influence, so there's a military side to it. We're speaking about the role that military bases could play vis-a-vis Yemen, But there's also it's a more broader military scramble. China's involved as well. The US is involved as well.
Djibouti is a site of a whole slew of international military facilities or foreign military bases. The United States, the Chinese, the French, the Japanese, the Saudis quite possibly going forward.
Some analysts worry that Arab countries are exporting their rivalries to the Horn of Africa, a part of the world with plenty of long-standing rivalries of its own.
You have a couple of splits, maybe 3 splits. On the one hand, you have the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, some of their allies, I would put Bahrain in that category, who are pushing in one direction in the Horn, which essentially means pushing against anyone affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. You have another group, Qatar, Turkey particularly, that have somewhat better relations with the Muslim Brotherhood and are going in another direction. And then Iran gets in the middle of all of this.
It used to be that the United States government thought about Africa as one portfolio and the Middle East and the Gulf as another portfolio. But now those two things are colliding.
Many countries in the Red Sea region are under the thumb of authoritarian regimes that are profoundly unpopular at home.
You have governments on both sides of the Red Sea that are quite authoritarian. And from a Western perspective, that does not strike me as being the proper way to be going with governance.
And there are real questions about the future of these countries going forward because there aren't real political institutions. Everything hinges on a single political figure, a strongman, effectively.
In Sudan's capital city of Khartoum, hundreds of thousands of protesters took to the streets in the spring of 2019 to demand democratic reforms. They succeeded in toppling longtime dictator Omar al-Bashir, but Sudan's military is unwilling to relinquish control.
The question of democracy in Sudan in many ways still hangs in the balance because the security apparatus that has unseated al-Bashir effectively is really al-Bashir's own government, right? It's still the old regime. They're very keen on retaining their political privileges and their dominance within the political system.
The role of several of the Gulf states is particularly important because they're effectively funding the Transitional Military Council in Sudan. So they have a disproportionate role in influencing what happens in the country. And unfortunately, money talks.
The Middle Eastern states, I think, their interests and how those interests are expressed in the Horn of Africa more or less fall into kind of 2 baskets. The one is an outstanding question about the role of Islam in political life. The second basket is really commercial and economic interests.
There is this sense that of a kind of domino effect, that if too many countries experience democratic transitions, other people closer to home might get ideas. So from a Saudi perspective, it's always better to nip these things in the bud.
In neighboring Ethiopia, a diverse country of more than 100 million, ethnic tensions have threatened the central government.
The protests incited political jostling within the ruling coalition, and you saw a rebalancing of power within the ruling coalition and the emergence of a new prime minister by the name of Abiy Ahmed. And Abiy Ahmed has taken on a reformist posture, and he's tried to do away with the old sort of authoritarian governing style of Ethiopia's ruling party.
He has opened up the press. He's opened up freedom for dissenting political groups. That is all for the good. But the ethnic pot is sort of boiling over, if you will. The lid was on the pressure cooker before, but that lid has been taken off, and now it's all spilling out.
With so much at stake, it is little wonder that many countries, including the United States, have established a military presence in the Red Sea. Recently, some officials in the Trump administration have suggested that the U.S. should commit even more assets to the region.
These states are undergoing historic transitions of a significant magnitude, and they deserve that kind of level of attention.
The question is, will the United States apply or use the necessary political capital towards reining these countries in the Horn of Africa? And I think the answer to that thus far is either no or kind of mixed.
What we are doing in the Middle East right now is contributing to instability. we are not using our diplomatic or even our non-diplomatic means in order to be able to bring about a new stable order in the region. Instead, we have taken sides, and we have very much decided that the Saudi and the Israeli and the UAE line is correct.
China, too, has entered the fray. In 2017, the People's Liberation Army opened its first overseas base in Djibouti, just a few miles from American, French, and Japanese bases. The move has raised questions about Beijing's military ambitions.
The Red Sea has been important for just about any country over the last 300-400 years that has aspired to influence in the Indian Ocean, and China's certainly no exception. So China's, of course, put its first overseas military base in Djibouti, despite promising for many decades that it would never do anything of the kind.
It is a milestone for the Chinese because before Djibouti, China never had a formal military base. Although they don't call it a military base, they call it Naval Supply Support Facility. And in my conversation with PLA officers, they also have made it clear that U.S. should not be too worried about the Djibouti base because it is only the first of many to come.
It's important to remember that the history is that we wanted China to participate in these counter-piracy missions, and now that they are going ahead and proceeding with sort of outfitting their logistics base there, people are suspicious, maybe they want to use it for something more.
As China promotes its Belt and Road Initiative, experts disagree on how overt a role Beijing intends to play in the politics of the Red Sea region.
U.S. doesn't depend that much on trade, on commerce going through the Red Sea. China does. China, about 40% of China's trade goes through the Red Sea. That's a critical element for China.
If you look at a map of the One Belt, One Road initiative, it's give or take a circle that goes over land and water around the world. And it's meant to be the future of trade. It's meant to be this efficient circle of world trade where they're building the train tracks and the ports that are necessary to have a more efficient set of trade routes. And so that One Belt, One Road goes up the Red Sea.
There's been a change in the color of the Chinese foreign policy under the new leadership of Xi Jinping, and people are wondering how far that's going to go, and I think has raised a lot of questions about this so-called peaceful rise policy.
Some analysts worry that the U.S. has not engaged enough politically and economically around the Red Sea to offer an effective counter to China's growing presence.
One of the things I've heard when I'm in Africa is that the U.S. likes to complain about the Chinese, but they don't like to compete.
It is fully within the capability of the United States to compete, and where China breaks the rules, to confront. But to say we should oppose Chinese commercial and investment activity, or somehow it's a threat to us and we can't compete with it, strikes me as profoundly un-American.
Those of us that sit on the Intelligence Committee and the Foreign Relations Committee, and my colleagues up here that sit on other committees, are well aware of how quickly China is moving. And it isn't just the growth, it's the velocity of the growth of what they're doing.
The Trump administration certainly has a rhetorical acknowledgement of China's ideological challenge, but what you really need is a long-term diplomacy, building partnerships, the kind of more soft power elements of what we do, and that hasn't necessarily been a strong suit of the Trump administration.
The risk for American diplomacy in the Horn, or how the United States would get it wrong, is to make its interactions with the Horn not about democratization, economic development, but in fact entirely about containing China. I think that's entirely the wrong approach.
The Red Sea could be an area where American and Chinese interests align, presenting a valuable opportunity for cooperation.
I mean, it has in the past. I think most people in the U.S. counter-piracy efforts were quite pleased at China's contributions there.
There is this kind of hysteria in some ways of the rise of China and the growing prominence of China in the Horn of Africa. And they are there, and they're there in important ways, but mostly as providers of finance.
It's not inherently a competitive environment between the United States and China, despite some of the rhetoric out of Washington and in Beijing. But, how do we find out, how do we identify what some of the areas of mutual interest, in fact, are, and how to pursue those openings in a way that's constructive and hopefully benefits not just external powers and broader questions of international peace and security, but also the people of the region.
Efforts to bring peace to the Red Sea region will test whether the international community can work together toward a common good. The stakes are high. The wrong decisions could create a fractured region of failed states and dangerous seas.
Great Decisions is America's largest discussion program on global affairs. Discussion groups meet in community centers, libraries, places of worship, and homes across the country to discuss global issues with their community. Participants read the 8-topic briefing book, meet to discuss each topic, and complete a ballot, which shares their views with Congress. To start or join a discussion group in your community, visit fpa.org or call 1-800-477-5836. Great Decisions is produced by the Foreign Policy Association in association with Thomson Reuters. Funding for Great Decisions is provided by PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP and the Nelson B. Delavan Foundation.